Hey everyone, it's Liz from Thrust Flight. I'm the chief flight instructor here, and today we're going to teach you how to perform a normal takeoff. It's one of the first maneuvers you'll learn and the first you'll perform without instructor assistance.
Okay, so we're here holding short of runway 17 at our airport, and we're going to teach you a normal takeoff today.
So this is actually a really good view of the runway hold position marking. If you see it right here in front of the aircraft's nose, I've got two solid yellow lines followed by two dashed yellow lines. This is the marking to tell us you're about to enter a runway. You need to stop and wait for a clearance if you're at a towered airport, or here at this non-towered airport, you'll hear us. We're going to announce ourselves before we take the runway. We're also visually going to check that there's no one else coming in for a landing before we enter the runway surface.
So first we're going to start by reviewing the takeoff checklist. We've already completed our run-up checks.
Right.
So the takeoff checklist here says throttles full, mixture rich, rotate at 55, climb at 70 to 80 knots, and flaps retract at safe altitude. That's the procedure we're going to take when we come onto the runway here. I can check the mixture already. Yes, it's at rich, which is appropriate for our density altitude, and the rest will perform as we pull on the runway. So I'll remind you of each of those steps, okay?
Okay.
So I said the mixture's at rich, which is appropriate for our density altitude. Depending on the altitude of the airport you're taking off from or the temperatures that day, you might need to adjust that mixture setting. So that's something your instructor can teach you as you start learning takeoffs and aircraft performance. But for our day, that's the appropriate setting. We're almost at sea level here, and the temperature was quite cool this day.
All right, we're going to visually clear that there's nobody coming in for a landing. This is a non-towered airport, so the burden's on us. Okay, and then we'll give them a call to announce it. Rockwall area traffic, thrust 484, taking off runway 17, staying in the pattern, Rockwall. All right, I check again, and then I apply power and roll out onto the runway.
Summer traffic, Cirrus 8200 Romeo is 5 miles to the south, coming in for the landing, runway 16. Summer traffic.
All right, so I pull onto the runway here, and I'm using the rudders to steer, right? And I'm lining up with the runway 17 in the center line here. Okay.
This is a really common place where I see new students that are learning takeoffs make a mistake. As they roll onto the runway, they don't get perfectly lined up with the center line, or maybe the airplane's aligned with the center line of the runway, but the nose wheel is slightly crooked, right? So it's perhaps turned a little bit. As soon as we apply power, that aircraft's going to start rolling really quickly. So if we're not lined up well beforehand, it's not going to continue rolling straight down the runway. So this is a really easy place to make a mistake. You want to make sure that you get it set up for success before you add full power.
We don't need to stop, so we're going to smoothly apply power. And as I'm doing that, I'm also pushing in with my right rudder pedal because the airplane's going to want to move left. Okay, we're building airspeed. I'm checking. Airspeed's alive. It is increasing. Engine gauges in the green.
So if you notice, I talk about a few checks before we're going to leave the ground. I'm checking the engine gauges and also the airspeed. That's actually part of the testing standards. For your private pilot check ride or your commercial pilot check ride, the airman certification standards say that you would check those two items, the engine instruments and the airspeed, before you would rotate.
We're approaching our rotate speed of 55, just using light rudder pressures to stay on center line till there. 55 knots, pulling back. It's a gradual application on the elevator here. And then I want to climb, and they said 70 to 80, so I'm like right in the middle. I'm at 73 knots, 74 knots right here. Even after lifting off the ground, I need right rudder pressure to stay coordinated. I'm looking for that inclinometer to be aligned.
Let's talk about the rudder application a little bit. So we discussed that when we line up on the runway, we want to have everything straightened out and our aircraft perfectly on the center line of the runway. As we add power and continue to roll, if you notice I said we'll need right rudder because the aircraft will want to go left. That's because of the aerodynamics of your aircraft. We have something called left turning tendencies, which naturally pull the aircraft left anytime you add RPMs like we are now. And so that right rudder corrects for it. So I was holding right rudder pressure in the whole way down the runway, but it's not the same amount of rudder pressure the entire length. As my aircraft gets faster and faster and faster, my control surfaces now get more effective. So I'm altering the rudder application I have for the amount required. Basically, if I'm starting to move left, I'm pushing in more right rudder. If I'm starting to move right, it's too much rudder and I'll let a little bit of pressure off that right rudder pedal. As we lift it off the ground, I still have those left turning tendencies acting on my aircraft, and so I still need right rudder, and that's what you hear me articulate just now, is I still need right rudder pressure. We have got some natural tendencies of our aircraft to pull us the other direction, and the rudder corrects for that.
Okay, if I'm fighting the controls at all, then I'll add some trim. If I'm let go right now, it looks like it wants to descend a teeny bit. Yep. So I'm going to apply some back elevator pressure and adjust the trim to relieve that.
So trim use is really important on takeoffs. In the Airman Certification Standards, they're going to hold you to some specific airspeed ranges. For the takeoff, they're expecting that you'll rotate at your aircraft's published rotation speed. And in the climb, they're expecting that you'll hold VY. For the private pilots, you get a range of +10, -5, so you can be 10 knots faster than your VY speed or 5 knots slower, but you have to stay within that range. For the commercial pilot, it gets a little more stringent. It's +5, -5 on the climb airspeed, and that you'd still rotate at the published airspeed for your aircraft. So in our 172, you heard me call out the numbers in the video. We said that we would rotate at 55 and I would climb at 70 to 80 knots. That's because of the checklist airspeed. That's what's in the manual for the aircraft. But the ACS standards, like I mentioned, want you to climb exactly at VY, which is right in the middle of this airplane at 74 knots. So I'm trying to hold that 74 knot climb speed within 5 knots, high or low. So a couple of errors that I see students perform here. On that takeoff roll, they are rolling down the runway, they're accelerating to their rotate speed, right, in this airplane 55 knots, and they'll either over-rotate, they pull back really hard. I'm gonna pull my airplane off the ground into the air. That's not quite what we want to do. We want to set the pitch attitude and let the airplane fly off from there. That's going to be the safest and most controlled takeoff for your aircraft. The other mistake that's pretty commonly performed by private pilots or commercial pilots improving their takeoff skills is they'll rotate too late. So we've passed 55 knots, now we're seeing almost 60 knots, and then we're rotating. We keep the airplane too long on the ground. That's a pretty common error. So we really want to be watching our airspeed as we're rolling down the runway.
All right, we'll continue our climb till we're at a safe altitude to exit the traffic pattern here. We can turn our crosswind about 300 feet below traffic pattern altitude, and that's a normal takeoff. Easy peasy. Everybody's ready to go do takeoffs now, right?
Yeah.
Who needs an instructor on board?
No, of course not.
Ready to solo.
Full power and send it.
So we just have a little bit of humor there at the end of the video, but truly takeoffs are going to be one of the first things you perform independently without your instructor's assistance. It's an exciting task to take your aircraft from being on the ground to in the air. Hopefully this video helps you know the proper steps to perform that safely.
Getting up is the easy part. Getting down, that's what you want us for.
That's right.
5 miles north, 5 miles east of the field, over find a field for a red pattern for 1-5, Cleburne.
I don't think I've ever been to Rockwell where it's so calm. Well, no, calm. Like there's barely any wisp of wind. Well, and then dead too, I guess. But there's no buffeting, no turbulence.
4367, left base, 18, full stop, 0.
Rockwell, traffic thrust 484, left downwind 17, Rockwell.
That wraps up today's video on the normal takeoff. We hope you enjoyed it. If you have a question, leave us a comment, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss out on future videos.